All right, Montana, I'm really excited to chat with you. I'm actually excited to nerd out with you because you and I have a lot of different things in common when it comes to gaming. We play a lot of the same games, we enjoy a lot of the same features of games, but I am not nearly the gamer that you are. There's a lot of gaming that you've done over the years that I'm jealous of. And I would like to ask you about. So, this is a questionnaire. This is an interview about you being a gamer. This is the third in its series, Interview with a Gamer. And I've got a bunch of questions I'm going to ask. So, at the beginning, the questions are a little bit more detailed, and then we get in a sort of a quick rapid fire round, like yes or no. But feel free to talk about these things. This is not just about getting the quantity of information, it's about getting a quality answer. So you're on the spot, Montana, to give me some quality answers about your life as a gamer. Does that make sense before we start?
Yeah, it does. I'm stoked to be here, and I'm stoked to talk about games and the hobbies that they are and what they mean for our lives.
Okay, well, we're going to start kind of on those lines. Before we get to that, when did you first start playing games, as far as you can remember?
I guess it depends on what you define as a game. Do you mean video games specifically or any kind of game?
Well, let's start with any kind of games. Like, do you remember playing board games or card games as a kid and then go on to video games?
Very much so. So, my dad taught me chess when I was very small, and he likes to tell a story of how at 3 years old I would start playing games of chess with him. And at first, I'd want to just like pretend and create all kinds of fantastical worlds with the chess pieces, but he got frustrated with that, and so eventually taught me how to play the game. And so I started playing chess at a very, very young age. And I have lots of memories of playing Monopoly with friends, of playing Risk growing up, slowly getting into more and more complicated games, Axis and Allies. And then around video games, I remember at the earliest time playing card games on my like Windows 95 computer, or maybe even earlier than that, and then playing Pinball, Space Cadet for a while, and then eventually, I guess it shifted probably around 8, 9, 10, started playing Age of Empires and Heroes of Might and Magic and stuff like that with friends. So a lot of strategy games defined my childhood and how I grew up.
When you were playing card games or chess when you were growing up, were these things that to you knew were really powerful and important at the time, or were they just something that you did? Like, how important was gaming to you as a kid? Was it incidental, just something that was around, or was it something that you had a passion for?
So when I was very small, I think it was incidental. It was something that I enjoyed doing with family and with friends. And then as I grew older, I realized that I was good at it. And so I started getting competitive in that space. And also I think it was something where I found a lot of space to make friends and a lot of space to enjoy the company of others while also working our brains out at the same time. So it was something that I would do, yes, on my own and competitively, but also became something that created groups of friendships along the line.
You mentioned Age of Empires, Pinball, Solitaire, probably on a computer, or Hearts, games like that. What was the first video game you remember playing? Was it one of those, or was it something different?
Solitaire, absolutely. I remember my parents had a laptop, and I was probably, God, I don't even remember how old I must have been, 6, 7, maybe slightly older than that, maybe slightly younger, and there was Solitaire on it, and I wouldn't spend tons of time playing it, but I would spend probably a good 15, 20 minutes playing Solitaire at a time, and it was always a lot of fun. Um, I don't have a particularly exciting story about playing Solitaire, but I guess because I already knew the rules to it, because I played it elsewhere, it was really easy to just pick it up on the computer and start playing comfortably. And I know some folks have had a challenge who haven't spent as much time playing games when they're young, but what might be an easy transition is playing games that they're comfortable with and games that they already know the rules of. That's maybe a little off topic.
No, no, that's fine. Um, Walk me through. So you talked about these games and then Age of Empires, Heroes of Might and Magic that you were playing around 10 years old or so. Walk me through how you got from there to the games you currently play today. Like, what was your evolution from that period? And I know that's a potentially 7-hour answer. So, just in brief, what was the transition for you from that period to this point in time?
Okay, so I started playing Age of Empires and Heroes of Might and Magic at big events that friends of ours would run. And all the kids would be in a room sitting around the computer, and all our parents would be talking about whatever issues were there that they were talking about at the time. And so I spent a lot of time at other people's houses playing other people's games. And that was the case basically all through my elementary school and up through most of high school as well. So yes, I would game at home, but most of the time when I'd be gaming at other people's houses, which meant that to a pretty significant extent, most of the games that I played were based on other people's preferences as opposed to mine. Yes, of course, I could influence it. Let's play blank game that you have as opposed to the other game over there. But it was still dependent on the other people who I knew and the friends that I had. And so what I played was based on what was available. That started to shift probably when I was 15, 16, when I started having access to my own computer that I could buy games for myself on, that I could spend more time playing, and really probably shifted in university when I started having more free time to play games when I wanted to on my own computers, on my own platforms across the board. I was always a PC gamer for the most part instead of a console gamer. That's where I felt comfortable, whether it was RPGs or strategy games or shooters. PC was always my comfort place as opposed to working on controllers and spaces like that. So in university, I played a pretty broad variety of games and still do, I think. Mostly balanced between strategy games, which I tend to think of as solo adventures. Yes, I'll play sometimes with other folks, but it's a way for me to stretch my brain and to kind of disappear into a world of strategic thought. Shooters, which I'll play with friends. That's, for me, very much a communal thing. It's not something that I compete with or that I try to push myself in. It's something that I treat as something very casual and fun. And then MOBAs like League of Legends, which again, partially with friends and partially on my own, that kind of splits the difference between them, but that scratches the competitive itch that I have outside of playing chess.
Okay. No, you're giving me a lot of food for thought here. There's a lot of experience that you've had, but you're articulating in such a way. You're drawing the lines between the different things that you do. And it's really interesting. And the different games that you play for different reasons, right? Like, we don't just play a game always to escape. We don't always just play a game to be social. Sometimes we play a game to stretch ourselves. Sometimes we play a game to relax. Sometimes we play a game to forget about our day. Sometimes we play a game to analyze our day. It's almost like dreaming. The function of a dream can have many, many different facets. So my next question is about... Sorry, go ahead. You're going to say something.
Yeah, I'll even throw a connection out there to professional wargaming to a certain extent, which is not something that I'm actively involved in with work, but is something that is adjacent to some of the areas that I work in, where gaming, yes, can be a pleasure, but it can also be a way to analyze the world around you and attempt to playtest solutions to it without actually putting yourself through said situations, which is particularly useful in the world of defense and security, where you don't really want to test things out by putting yourself in harm's way. And a similar thing can be used in a way to describe even model UN, model parliament type activities like that, which aren't traditionally thought of as games, but were a big part of my university experience. And when I look back at them, there isn't that much that's different between a model UN that is hosted by a university somewhere with bringing students together to basically game what happens in the United Nations, and a war game or a D&D game. All of those share a lot of the same basic tenets of what functions as a game, even if they're used in different ways. So I guess if you take the question even more broadly of kind of what significance gaming has had and what kinds of games that I've played over the years, I'd probably, in its wider sense, also include Model UN, Model Parliament, and wargaming courses in university, which are used from a way to analyze current events and respond to them as effectively as possible.
Okay. No, that's I find a similar connection. So when I'm playing a game, especially one that calls upon strategy, I can feel myself learning and finding ways to maybe apply that to other aspects of my life, or just when I'm reading the news or trying to think about the world at large. If I'm writing about something, playing a game can sometimes give me either a different perspective or a more holistic perspective of what I'm looking at. It can also be fun. And sometimes when those two things go together, what a magical way to be educated, to learn something through both fun and the pressure of the mind in a certain situation. So the next question is about favorites or preferences. And I know that this is like asking a film buff, what are your top 5 movies? Or a filmmaker in that respect, what are your top 5 movies? But what I'm asking is, at this moment, what are the games that would call to you most? If you could just play a game or 5 games right now, maybe calling upon those different things. One game that calls upon the need to strategize, one that you can disappear into, one that you can play with friends. What would be the most interesting, provocative games for you now, today?
Okay. One that you can disappear in, one that you can strategize with, and one that you can play with friends. Yes?
Well, those are the 3 categories I just came up with, but you might find others. But yeah, what are the games you would want to play for different reasons?
Okay, first of all, I'll say that's an interesting and challenging question because it removes a lot of favorite games of mine that can only really be played once or that have limited replayability, right? So some of my favorite games are things like Hollow Knight or Outer Wilds, which once you play, you can't really go back and revisit over and over again. So they're not something that for me is something that I will choose to return to. And in a way, the games that have the most replayability and bring you back over and over and over to them aren't always my favorite games in terms of quality of a game, period. But I digress a little. So to answer your question, something that I will play over and over and over with friends, strategize, and there's one other.
Disappear into. Okay,
so disappear into big grand strategy games. So Crusader Kings 3 has been really scratching that itch for me. It feels like a combination of Game of Thrones and a strategy game and a whole lot of storytelling that you can play with in whatever way you want, all put together in a world that builds fake connections between fake characters but makes them feel very, very real and very much puts you into the space of making you feel like you're sitting at the King's Council trying to decide what to do with marriage pacts and alliances. It's like this wonderful combination of all of that, along with a little injection of The Sims and some life role-playing thrown in there to make you feel like you're a part of a medieval court. It's a fantastic, fantastic game.
There's a bit of strategy to that, though, too, isn't there? Like, would you say that there's a crossover there between disappearing into that game, but also exercising your strategic muscle?
Yes, though I think it depends on how you want to play it. Because for Crusader Kings in particular, I feel like in some ways playing it in a less perfect way makes for a better experience. And so in many games, like League of Legends or chess or anything else like that, where you're trying to perfect how you play, there is a better way to play it that you should be aiming for most of the time if you want to be good at that game. While with Crusader Kings, because it's more about the journey that you take, being better at the game sometimes breaks the game or makes it too easy. There's exploits that you can use that give it less role-playing value and make you feel less like you're a part of that world. Well, if you play it in a less competitive, less perfect way, you actually get more out of the game. So absolutely, there's strategy involved in thinking critically and making your marriage alliances and moving your armies around and sieging the right castle at the right time. But as much as there's strategy in it, I think part of the reason that I relax into it is that I force myself to embody the characters that I'm representing there, not just find the perfect solution to whatever problem that I'm looking at. Maybe I'll play a mad king who is focused on gaining back territory no matter what. Maybe you'll play somebody who's madly in love with somebody in another kingdom, and that's their priority. So you're going to make that sleeping with the heir to the empire somewhere else. Maybe your greatest enemy's kid or something like that. There's all kinds of suboptimal ways of playing that make it a better experience and make it a more relaxing experience.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned this. I'm going to probably get myself in trouble now because I'm going to mention a game that I know you're going to want to talk about for 6 hours, which is Disco Elysium. That's another game like Crusader Kings 3 that has encouraged me to play imperfectly. Not necessarily to try to fail, but to embrace failure and to not just try to avoid it. A lot of the games I play, the whole point of it is to avoid dying, avoid failing, avoid falling down the pitfall, avoid running out of money. But in games like Crusader Kings 3, for me, I'm being asked to play a character and to follow what that character would want to do, like you just described. So, Crusader Kings 3 is a paradox game. I know you played these games. Hearts of Iron 4, Europa Universalis 4. Actually, the Europa Universalis 1 is how I first got into those games. I remember playing it years ago. I loved it. It was fascinating. It was overwhelming how much research they put into the history of it. But the point of those games, even to this day, is to conquer the world. It's like a complicated version of Risk, where you don't have to play it this way. You are encouraged to take a different tack. But really, when you play EU4, you're going to try to take over the world most of the time. That's kind of the goal in the back of your mind, and a lot of the mechanics of the game push you into that. Crusader Kings 3, it's really hard to take over the world. There are mechanics that kind of hamper you from doing that. It's not impossible. Many people paint the map a certain color and put their videos up on YouTube, but that's not really the point of it. It's almost like an RPG. And I've loved how the game has asked me to do something different and still enjoy the same strategic consequences. And in Disco Elysium, you can't play the perfect game. It's not written into the game. No matter how much you try to make and you are one character that everybody else plays, no matter how much you try to rescue him, he is already cursed and he's already broken. And he's going to bring that to the table, and you are going to have to embody that. And so where you can kind of play around the conventions of Crusader Kings 3, Disco Elysium is an example of a game where you're forced into accepting the darkness of the human soul. Whether you succeed or fail is almost irrelevant. Anyways, I'll pass it over to you because I'm sure there's many things you want to say.
I think there's one point in particular that I want to bring up there, which is that they incentivize failure. Both these games, both Crusader Kings and Disco Elysium do, in a way that in most games, when you fail, you lose. You go back to a save point, you restart. Or in one of these big map painter games, you lose resources that will make it harder for you to play in the future or potentially get completely destroyed. But in Disco Elysium and in Crusader Kings, even though they're very different genres of games, they create spaces where failure can lead to something better in the end. Or even if it's not better, at least it doesn't remove your ability to play a game. So chess, you lose a piece, you lose the game eventually. Disco Elysium, you fail a check or a skill check, and sometimes you get a new adventure that opens up that you would never have had. So if you pass the skill check, you figure out the problem, but you don't have access to a whole other set of adventures that's a part of the game. Or in Crusader Kings, your monarch can be defeated, but what if your monarch wasn't a very good monarch? And so now you get the chance to play as their heir, whether prince or princess, and maybe they're a fantastic, talented individual who suddenly can go on to expand their empire dramatically or rebuild now that they have less expenses and less challenges that they have to deal with on the outskirts of their empire. So finding ways to make failure not the end, but a part of a process and a part of a story is a really interesting part of both of those games. And it's not something that I see in a whole lot of games that are developed in either genre, either strategy games or role-playing games. with maybe the one exception of Planescape Torment, which is a much older, I call it the precursor to Disco. Doesn't use a lot of the same mechanics, but has a similar focus on story, less on failure, and more about what you uncover about the main character as an individual, and what does that say about a person over their life. It's games that ask questions as opposed to giving you an answer for them.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Games that ask you to find the answer of your own as opposed to just unlock or uncover the one answer that is at the center of it. Not just because there are multiple, but because there are infinite. There are as many answers as there are players. Okay. These are all things that I could talk to you more about, and maybe we will. We might do episodes, you and I, on some of these games, because I know there's at least probably 15 games that you and I have played that we could talk about. The ones we were just talking about now being some of them. But back to the questionnaire, how often do you play games? In a week, a day, a month? How often is it for you?
I mean, depending on what you talk about as games, I probably play games every single day, right? I've been playing chess with my dad online for the last 4 or 5 years, since before the pandemic. And so every day I'm making a move there. Maybe not playing a full game, but at least making a couple moves. So that's a constant that's there no matter what. I find games to be much better at making me relax and much more enjoyable than sitting down to watch a TV show. So games will be my way to relax after a long day, and way to zone out and enjoy an activity in a way that other folks might spend it, again, watching TV or watching YouTube videos. So probably reasonably serious gaming sessions 3 to 5 times a week, but it depends on what's happening in my life, right? I don't want gaming to take away from the tasks and responsibilities and things that I'm excited for, but it is a good way to unwind.
Yeah, got it. Do you ever live stream your games?
Almost never, with maybe one exception. I've gotten into what started as a miniature game called Star Wars Armada many years ago, and ended up getting pretty good at it. So it's a little bit like Warhammer, but made to be in space, and feels a little bit like you've got fleets of old men of war from the 18th century, because you're dealing with speed and momentum and things like that. It's also very slow paced overall, but I've gotten pretty good at it overall. I hazard that I'm probably one of the better players in Canada at it, probably top 4 or 5, and briefly had a stint of top 2 in the world on the rated system that was there. I guess I'm still number 2 there. Anyways, I got pretty decent at it. And so I did live stream Armada to the Armada community a reasonable amount. Not consistently, but it was a fun thing to do while I was playing quite a bit of it.
So kind of along these lines, about like how often do you play, how often do you want to play, are games addictive for you?
I think so. I think that is a legitimate challenge where it's easy to lose yourself in them and to lose a lot of time doing it, and ask yourself, what have I done with this time and what have I done with my life? So yeah, I think there are some definite addictive elements of gaming that's there, and they sometimes speak to more a broader sense of my mental space than they do the gaming in particular. In that, I think if I spend a lot of time disappearing into games, it says that I'm probably going through a lot of stress and that the rest of my life is probably not in the best state at the time. While when I keep a better balance between games and other activities, probably in a better mental state overall. Which is, I think, to say that I think it's less to do with an inherent aspect of games that make them addictive, though there is something to be said for, bursts of adrenaline that you can get from solving problems in games quickly and efficiently that you don't get in regular life. but I think it has more to do with general mental state than it does a game itself or any particular inherent attribute of a game. It's a very good question.
Yeah, so following on that question about addiction, but also following on the question about how often do you play, be mindful of, I'm going to use the word should here. And I know that that's sometimes a bad word, but it's just to kind of highlight how you feel about yourself. Should you, given how much you play now, play games more or less often than you currently do?
Probably less often. I think that I definitely trend to playing too many games. I think it has more to do with the mindset going into a game. And let me unpack that a little bit. If I go into a game wanting to play it and wanting to make that a part of my day, then it's a good thing. It's something that I should do. If I go into a game just because I feel like I have nothing else to do, or because it's an automatic reaction that at the end of my day I'll boot up a game and that I don't feel better after playing it, then it indicates that I probably shouldn't be playing as much games. And so it's a warning sign to me that if I've played a couple of hours of a game and I'm more frustrated then than when I started, that maybe I shouldn't have done that, or maybe I should play a little bit less.
I would agree with that. For me, it's not just frustration, it's a feeling of emptiness versus fullness. You mentioned this a few moments ago. Like if I end off of a playing of a game and I feel full of something, like I've experienced something, like I've been given an idea and I'm going to walk and think about it, or I can't wait to play again to explore that idea further, that's a great feeling to have. It's like reading a book. It's like talking to someone interesting. But if I leave the game feeling like I'm emptied out, like I've got less than I had when I started, and I'm just spending my time, then I probably shouldn't be doing that. And I think I'm probably just repeating what you just said, but yeah, go ahead.
I think maybe that's even holding ourselves to too high a standard when it comes to games. Because as humans, there are times when we will do activities and not feel incredibly mentally stimulated from them, whatever it is. Maybe it's watching a trash TV show for a little while. Maybe it's watching some videos on YouTube or getting stuck scrolling through TikTok. Maybe it's reading the news and feeling like you don't care about what's happening in the world and that it's just depressing you. We often do activities that don't necessarily make us feel inherently better about ourselves. And that's okay sometimes, right? It's okay to do something to pass the time and to let your brain relax in that space. You know, we can read trash novels if we want to. We can watch trash TV. We can go for walks. Maybe going for walks is always a plus side. But point being, we don't always, or we shouldn't always hold ourselves to the standard that we always need to get something from our activity, right? Not every TV show that you watch needs to be The Wire, right? You can go back and enjoy some Marvel Avengers films. They're not going to add a whole lot to your life, but they'll be fun, and you can walk out of that feeling good. In a similar fashion with gaming, you don't always need to come out of it saying, this was the best experience I've ever had. But at the very least, make sure that there isn't a negative experience there, I guess, is what I'm saying. You know, you can have a mediocre experience with gaming, and that's fine. We shouldn't hold ourselves to always having an amazing experience. But if you're having an active negative relationship with it, then it's a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like the same need to be productive, you have to have a break. You know, you can't force yourself to be productive all of the time. If you do, you will not be. You need to actually take time off in order to go back to, you know, the on and off switch. I think gaming is quite similar.
And I even find that sometimes with the types of games that I play, that there's some games that I'll only play when I'm really well rested and able to tackle it. I take Red Dead Redemption as a fantastic example of this. It's a sprawling, complicated, emotionally deep RPG, and it takes a lot of energy for me to engage with it. There's days when I just don't want to, right? It's a lot of work to do. And sometimes it's okay not to put the work into a game either.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. A few questions here, which are kind of the mid-level questions. So not yes or no, but yes or no, and then a quick example. So, first one, has a game ever made you laugh?
Oh yeah. Um, let's think about games that have made me laugh a lot. I mean, Disco Elysium is a bit laughter and a bit crying. That's probably a positive example. Hollow Knight as well has moments of comedy popping through it. I think a lot of the laughter that I get with games comes from the people that I play with, though. Um, and having a good group of friends that you can joke and laugh and experiment with is where a lot of the laughter comes when it, for me, for gaming. So had a group of friends that we played Astroneer for a while, which is a space exploration building game, which is all procedurally generated, and it was just a lot of fun. We'd get stuck in strange places and have to dig our way out. We'd build roads to silly places. We'd explore new planets and see strange creatures, and there was a lot of laughter and a lot of fun that came to be a part of that. So I think the parts of gaming that are the most fun to me are the ones that come from the people that you play games with. And also Divinity Original Sin. That game is really funny.
You kind of answered this a moment ago. Has a game ever made you cry?
Yeah. So Witcher 3 definitely, in one of its expansions, made me feel lots of different things, because you get connected to characters over time, right? It's a good way to tell an important and potentially significant story in a way that makes the player feel like they're immersed in a world. Cyberpunk, the ending from that, depending on which ending you end up participating in, is hugely emotionally impactful. And then maybe going back all the way to Mass Effect, and some of there's a suicide mission that's a part of it near the end, which, depending on how you play it, might not go very well for all the characters that you've developed a relationship with. So I think that games can play with emotions in a similar way to books. It's another medium of storytelling.
Has a game ever made you quit in frustration?
Quit in frustration. During the game itself?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess you could also take it as a game ever made you want to quit life in frustration. But no, has a game ever frustrated you to the point you had to quit?
I've gotten pretty frustrated at some games of League of Legends. Never to the point where I've rage quit partway through them, but to the point where as soon as they've finished, I've logged off and been like, no, I'm done. This is putting me in a bad mood. I think sometimes games with lots of RNG. So if you've ever played XCOM or some of those games, fantastic, very well developed, but you build up your characters over time and you move them around in a sort of strategic map, and your various characters in it shoot at aliens who are invading Earth, and there's always a percentage chance of whether they hit or not. And those percentages can be pretty heartbreaking depending on how much time that you've invested in a game. So when you're very experienced, kitted out character, gets killed in one shot by a monster who you didn't see the turn before, that can be pretty heartbreaking. I've definitely shut down a game of XCOM after that happened.
Has a game ever made you decide to change your life?
No. Not that I can think of.
The next question is, do games teach you, which I think that's probably an obvious question to most people, but some people play games not to learn anything. Do games teach you? And if so, what generally what have they taught you, both specifically and maybe more generally?
I think there's a bit of, there's an obvious element of logic problems that comes with games, right? Every single game is a problem to be solved in one way or another. And maybe that goes at odds with my experiences with Disco Elysium and Crusader Kings, and is maybe what makes those games so special. But every other game that I look at, I think of as, how do you solve this? How do you become the best you can at it? What's the most effective way of playing it? And so when you play games, you're constantly looking for solutions. And I think there's something to be said for taking that approach to the rest of your life, whether it's work or hobbies, the ability for an individual to always be on the lookout for a way to solve the problems around them is a very, very good attribute to hold. Similarly, I think that there's a lot of resilience that gaming can teach people, which is going to sound odd because in a lot of ways in gaming, there's no consequences, right? Your character dies, you're still sitting in your nice warm room, cozy and comfortable without any challenges, but there's a certain level of tenacity that gamers need to look at a problem. Maybe it's a hard problem because they put a game to the hardest difficulty, or maybe it's just a challenge for them right in that moment. But to come back and try over and over and over again to solve it until they finally figure it out. So I'd say the two big things that come from gaming are logic and tenacity. And then I'll add one other thing in there, which is probably based more on online play, but teamwork, right? A game like League of Legends depends on the other people that you're playing with. Yes, you as an individual and your skills make a difference, but what makes just as much of a difference is how you cooperate, communicate, and engage with the other people on your team. And so I think they also teach teamwork as well.
Yeah, I would sometimes say, depending on the game, there's another category which is more epistemic, like knowledge formation. So you and I play Paradox games. Some of these, whether it's Europa Universalis 4, Crusader Kings 3, to some extent, at least in how the game is initially started out, Hearts of Iron 4, and Imperator Rome, you can learn a lot about history, geography, the way that countries interacted. In Crusader Kings 3, there's a whole essentially level of the game that's been built around culture and faith, language that you can learn about. And I think professors of history do use these games to teach knowledge. I don't know if it's as, it may not be as effective because you don't have to learn these things in order to play the game. You can rely on the encyclopedia. Whereas, as you just mentioned, teamwork, you have to learn that skill to play these games.
Okay, I'll throw a story in there from my time at King's, because one of the courses that I took in my master's program was on wargaming. And an example that my professor gave during that course was about how wargames can be used to understand history. And he designed a game with some colleagues that I believe it was about ancient Rome and the first war, maybe it was the first or the second Punic Wars. Anyways, one of the Roman wars with Carthage. And they designed this game to be as historically accurate as possible and to create similar challenges to the player based on logistics, force composition, all these different attributes to what Roman generals and Carthaginian generals had faced at the time as well. And as a result of this game, some of the details are slipping my brain now. This is, 6 years ago now? But as a result of this game, he started to understand, at least more clearly, why Rome made the choices that it did based on the logistics limitations that they had at play. And so I think there is a level of understanding that we can even bring to the past as well, where us as gamers, by embodying the types of the decision space that somebody had 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, can not only actively improve our understanding of those events, but sometimes maybe learn bits and pieces that allow us to uncover new things about the past by thinking critically about the choices that were made then.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. The first in this series of Interview with a Gamer was with Mike Shepard, who plays sports games. Games that I'm not really familiar with, and I'm not really familiar with the sports that they're about either. I mean, I know about the sports, but I'm not an avid sports fan. But the amount of data that these companies put into these games in order to make them not only as realistic as possible, but as appealing as possible to sports fans who are really interested and intrigued by numbers. It seems at some point like these are going to become very close to a simulacrum of the actual sports themselves. Not only predictive, but maybe almost in like a distinction without a difference between the simulation of a game and an actual game that you're watching. So what does it matter which one you're going to watch? They're both going to have a variable outcome depending on a whole slew of things that could go differently in a particular match. And what does that teach us about sports? It's a fascinating question. What does a war game teach us about moments in the past that we couldn't think about simply by reading it in a book or analyzing the data with our brains, which are not meant to take all of this data and see it in a simulation? And I think it can lead to some really fascinating areas. And I think we're only at the beginning of this. There's a lot of room for discovery here of where we can go with what games can show us and teach us about ourselves, about our past, potentially also about our future. I'm going to get into the rapid fire now. So the first category here is preferences in the either or. So this is just pick one or the other. And you don't have to explain it. We're just going to go through this quickly. So, Montana, do you prefer games that ask you to imagine something, or do you prefer ones that give you everything that you're imagining, just give it to you up front? Essentially imagine it for you.
I think imagine.
Do you usually play games that wind you up? So like games with action or timers or quick motions, or ones that wind you down, asking for patience, planning, that have no time limits, so forth?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Honestly, I play both. It depends on the mood that I'm in, and I definitely vacillate between the two. I don't know if I can give a straight either or answer to that one.
Totally fair. I'd probably give the same answer. I'm probably both depending on my mood and what I'm looking for. Turn-based or real-time?
Real time, but that's also a close one. But real time.
You've answered this one already. PC, console, or phone, tablet?
PC, hands down.
Yeah. Single player, multiplayer, or co-op?
If I could, I'll say multiplayer. If I could only ever pick one of those for the future, that I would only ever play multiplayer. But it's close with single player. I really like it as a solo activity as well.
Open world or on the rails?
On the rails, but only if it's well constructed.
Okay. AAA or indie?
Indie.
Story or action?
Story.
Dialogue or visuals?
Dialogue.
And is a game more a form of art or entertainment?
I think a game is more a form of entertainment, but that doesn't stop it from being a form of art as well, and that doesn't mean that there can't be forms of art within it, even if it trends towards entertainment.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this question belongs here, but I do want to ask it in some sense, because I find this dichotomy, whether it is false or not, between art and entertainment, an interesting one to make us think about what games are for us.
I mean, I think it really depends on the creator. It really depends on the creator of the game and their intention within it, right? I could say the same thing about a movie. Is a movie entertainment or art? Well, you've got art house flicks, and you've got generic action films. I don't think your generic action film is really intended for art versus entertainment, but an art house flick 100% is intended for art as opposed to entertainment.
But even then, like I could say there's art house films that are immensely entertaining and that I can watch over and over again, and some action movies that I find are artful. You know, I just recently watched these movies, the Equalizer movies with Denzel Washington. Like, on some levels, these are pretty dumb action movies, like Taken with Liam Neeson. Like, they're fulfilling a need for us to watch someone taking out revenge by being violent in a cool way. Like, they're kind of, I don't want to say they're dumb. They're very intelligently done. but like they're predictable, they're serving a need, they're not surprising me in some ways, and yet I can't help but say that when I watch Denzel Washington on film, he is an artist at work. He's not just an entertainer. He is going so deep into the material. And so it's just it's a hard distinction to make. And again, like I get that the question is, it often provokes disagreement and disharmony because people would say, well, what's the difference between art and entertainment? But I think that there's something in that question that asks us to think about a game in a different way and to maybe approach games in a different light and ask them, what are they supposed to do for us? You know, like I want games that are forms of art, but I probably spend 99% of my time playing games for entertainment. Maybe the same would be true for film. Anyways, okay, so this is the next few questions are now a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being the low, 10 being the high, obviously. How important are aesthetics between 1 and 10?
Aesthetics. 8.
Story.
For me personally, 10.
The player character, your character.
3.
Other characters.
9.
Mechanics.
8.
Novelty.
6.
And strategy.
Probably again an 8 there.
Okay.
The novelty one in particular is very interesting because part of what I enjoy from games is that feeling of looking for perfection. And I know I'm contradicting myself before when I said I'm enjoying not looking for perfection in games, but I guess you can want both sometimes depending on your mood. But just as like you can make a perfect dish of pasta that doesn't have to be the fanciest pasta dish in the world, you can also make a perfect game that doesn't have to be particularly novel, but gets all the right attributes that you're just really looking forward to. Chess is a fantastic game that is pretty close to perfect, but has almost no novelty in it. I guess you can have novelty in terms of positions being slightly different, but the moves, the pieces, they're all so deeply understood that in a way, there's almost no novelty to it, despite it being probably the most popular game in human history.
Yeah, but there's something about that. Like novelty is, I guess I should put it on another scale here of nostalgia, or something to call us back to something, tradition maybe. I might actually add that to the questionnaire, but because there is a spectrum in there, and that's important to understand because it's not all just about the new. And going back to film, it's the same is true as there with film. We always want to be seeing a new film, but often they just do the same things that they've already done before, that we've seen 100 times before, but we just want to get that fix again. And there's something wrong with that. That's human nature. Okay, last few questions here. Do you enjoy watching other people play games?
Yes, though I'll generally choose to play a game myself rather than watch somebody else play it. But yes.
Okay. Do you have any friendships that have formed from gaming?
Yeah, a few in different strange ways. I've befriended some League of Legends players that I've met. During pandemic, we'd talk multiple times a week. I probably engaged with them more often than I engaged with some of my oldest friends from back home. I could say probably a similar thing to some of my oldest friends, that I got to know them because of gaming that was there, and gaming is still an activity that we can always come back to and relax into, and it's something that lets us forget the world and hang out together. So yeah, absolutely. I've also, the Star Wars Armada community has been a fantastic community as well, of folks who are generally fairly mature and established in their field, which I find is rare for gaming communities overall. So I'm playing games with university professors and engineers and political scientists and folks from all kinds of interesting backgrounds. And I've very much appreciated it when I can engage with gamers who love gaming, but also have other things going on in their life at the same time.
Okay. Do you have any games that are on your shelf, digital or real, that you're waiting to play?
Oh, I'll have to check my Steam library for a second there. I guess, okay. I've been meaning to play Marauders, which is a sort of hardcore space shooter that you play where you sneak around and loot spaceships and space stations. But that's also very much a game that I think I'd play with friends, as opposed to something that I'd play much on my own. And so I need to wait till my schedule aligns with that of some friends of mine to play. But that's pretty far up there. And then I've been having the urge to go back to Cyberpunk and play the next Cyberpunk expansion when it comes out. So that's not out yet, but definitely on my list of things I'd like to dive into again.
Cool. That's great. Okay. Final question. And knowing that the answer to this question would have been different yesterday and will probably be different tomorrow, but today, what's the best game you've ever played?
Man, I thought you'd asked that earlier, and now I've got to have it come back again and struggle with it again.
Well, maybe the answer is different now than it was 20 minutes ago.
I'm going to say Planescape Torment. Though how much of it qualifies as a game versus a story is a little up in the air, because all the attributes that make it exceptional are mostly connected to it as a story. Though I guess the personal elements of how you develop your character over time and the ability of you as a player to guide that experience. So Planescape is about a character who wakes up with no recollection of their past and who attempts to rediscover it and ends up realizing that there are multiple versions of themselves from the past that they've interacted with in different ways, that have different personalities. And the whole game becomes a question of what makes an individual unique, what makes you unique from your other selves or your past experiences, what shapes a person and defines their personality. It's a fantastic philosophical adventure. It's old, it's aged, its graphics are terrible, its gameplay elements are poor, but what a damn good story.
Excellent. Okay, Montana, this has been wonderful. This is a question I'm just adding on for you. Is there a question that I haven't asked that you wish I did? Is there something we didn't talk about that you wish that I had brought up? A gap in the questionnaire, something that you were hoping that we would get to, but we didn't?
I think there's an interesting question maybe around what games do you hate, right? You've talked about what makes a game good. Well, what makes a game bad? What problems exist in the gaming space that maybe should be addressed or should be done differently, or is a frustrating mechanism that exists in the way that games are presented? I think we can go through live service games. I think is a terrible trend overall, and there's lots of challenges to putting game mechanics behind paywalls that shouldn't be there. And maybe that's a result of inflationary pressures, and that games haven't actually increased in price that much over the past 20 years, while the amount of money that needs to be invested in them has increased as well. And so we're in an odd situation where games should probably cost 2-3 times as much what they actually do, but because of some of the measures that are being put in place to sell skins, lock content behind paywalls, there's some challenges arising there. And maybe the other thing that I'll throw out there is games that are not attempting to be innovative in any way, shape, or form. Games that just release reskinned versions of them without changing any of the mechanics and then attempt to sell them. And I think that's a pretty major problem for the gaming industry as a whole. And then I'll throw one more in there because it just popped into my head, which is games that are being released too early, that are not given the time that they need to mature, that have had content cut because of release schedules, and that could have been beautiful works of art if only they hadn't been rushed out because of a potential budgetary concern. And then maybe flopped because of it too, right? You know, you rush something out because of budgetary concerns, and then you shoot yourself in the foot and it becomes a failure because it was rushed.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer. I think there's, I mean, you have a lot of different examples of bad games. I actually had a question in the questionnaire about what was your most disappointing game you've ever played, and I cut it because usually when a gamer is disappointed, they just stop playing, and then they don't really have much to talk about because they just stopped playing. Whereas they spend hours and hours and hours playing the games that they do like. It's quite rare for a game to be disappointing and still yet be played. Um, yeah, okay. Montana, thank you so much for this. This has been a whole pack of insight that I'm going to have to dig into even further, and I hope we chat again.
Hey, likewise, I'm looking forward to the next chat, and good luck with the next series of interviews and with all your exciting gaming endeavors from here on in. I'm sure they're going to lead to some very interesting places.
Cool. Okay, talk to you soon.